Okay, everybody, we've found the house that you guys want to buy. So now, how do we write a good offer for that? How do we write a winning offer? And what are the strategies that tend to work? It's a little more in depth than the house that's 100,000. We offer 90 in the hopes that the seller just comes back at 95. We split the difference and go on that way. There's a little more to it. For example, during the recession when there were a lot of foreclosures out there, I had buyers that would say, let's offer really low. At that time, we'd say the price might be 200,000 from the bank, and we'd offer 125,000. I had banks that would respond with $1 off of the asking price, and in some cases, in one case, I actually had them offer counterback $1 over the asking price. That didn't mean that they were only willing to come down by $1. That was just their way of instructing my buyers that they weren't going to give the house away. So what is important to the seller? That's really a key component, but in order to start with knowing how to write a competitive offer, a good offer, we need to understand how is the house priced. So let's take our example of the $100,000 house. Let's say that the asking price is $110,000. Now, what I'm going to do is pull comparable sales from that same subdivision and immediately around it, and recent sales, typically within the last 6 months, maybe a year, depending upon the market, and houses that are similar size, so that we have an apples to apples comparison for what has sold. That might show us that the house is worth 100,000, or maybe it's worth 110 like they're asking, or it might be worth more. Usually it's not worth more, but in some cases. So let's say that it's worth 110,000 in our minds. We're looking at what has sold, and we look at it and say, yeah, their asking price is reasonable. If this is new on the market, we might offer the full 110,000, and that's a fair price. That's a good transaction for us. Let's take the opposite case, and let's say we look at it and say it's 110 is overpriced. It's worth 95 on a good day. If we offered 100,000 and got under contract at 102,000 with the seller, we might feel good about that because we got 8,000 off of the asking price. But if in our mind it's only worth 95,000, we're still overpaying. So just because they came down doesn't mean we got a good deal. And in the other case, just because we gave the seller their asking price doesn't mean we got a bad deal. So we really need to know what we think the value is. Now, online, you can see Zillow, Homes.com, Realtor.com, several different places have the estimated value tools. And those give us a starting point. Those give us a good idea. But if you compare those, especially those three, Homes.com, Zillow, Realtor.com, you'll find a variety of values, and sometimes they vary greatly. So it's important for us to do our own homework to be sure that, all right, we've got a pretty good idea of what we think the house is worth. This is especially important when someplace is brand new on the market. We've been looking for a while, something comes right on the market, we go out and look at it that day, and you love it. We're going to write the offer. We want to know that their asking price is reasonable because we're probably not going to get off of their asking price in the first couple weeks that it's on the market. And there's a chance, if it's priced well, if it's a nice property, we may be competing with one or two other buyers, in which case we may need to go a little higher than the asking price. So that's critical for us to be confident with that you are comfortable with the price that you're paying for the house, because while we're going to get an appraisal on the property, I'm more concerned about your appraisal of the value of the property as opposed to somebody else's who's not buying the house and who's not my client. So I want you comfortable with the value. Other things we need to know before writing the offer. How long has it been on the market? And when was the last price reduction that this house had? If it had been on the market for 3 months, but they've had a few price reductions, and their most recent one was just a week ago. Realistically, it's kind of only been on the market for a week at that price. We want to know, how long has the seller owned the property? What did they pay for it? Now, if they've owned it for 15 years, it really doesn't matter what they paid for it. The market has changed dramatically. But if they bought it 2 years ago, that might help us get into a little more of the psychology of where the sellers have priced it and what they might be willing to do. I will talk to the listing broker to find out what are some of the important factors for the seller. Is timing important for them? Do they need time after the closing to stay in the house because they're waiting for their new house to be completed? These are all valuable because these are bargaining chips for the purchase price that you may be willing to give to the seller in consideration of a lower price. So writing a good offer it is composed of several different factors, not just the price. From the seller's standpoint, what matters to the seller in our offer? Price is number one. Type of financing, how much money are you putting down, is number two. How much earnest money is coming with the offer? That's an important one. In this series, the First-time Homebuyer Series, we typically aren't going to be looking at a contingency for a home sale, but that's a big one for the seller. If I'm writing an offer and you have to sell your house first in order to buy this new house, the seller, if they're willing to give us that contract, it's going to be at full price. They won't be coming down off of the price at all for that type of an offer. What's the length of the contract? When do we want to close? Is that 3-4 weeks, kind of a standard time frame is 4 weeks, or are we pushing it out to 2 months? That may not be as appealing to the seller. So we need to put together the entire package. And if we know what's important to the seller, we can play around with some of those variables to offset maybe a lower offer. It really depends on knowing what the seller wants and knowing what we want to be able to put together a winning offer. Because what I've found in negotiations is that what we're actually looking for is a win-win negotiation. We are not trying to beat the seller because the seller is simply going to say no. What we're trying to do is find a way for the seller to be looking at this as a winning bid, a winning negotiation for them, and we're looking for the same way it's a winning negotiation for us. And if we can bring both of those two together, we will get to the closing table with this offer. How much is it worth? It really depends. From the seller's standpoint, I have seen sellers give $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 off of their asking price just for the ability to stay in the house an extra month after closing so that they could wait for their new home to be completed. So it really is valuable for us to know what's important to the seller. Knowledge is the key to a successful contract, to being able to write the contract well. I have had buyers that have gone through home buying seminars, a weekend seminar, and they come in saying, well, we need to offer 10% under asking price or something like that. And that strategy just doesn't work. As I mentioned earlier, if the house is priced well, they're not going to give us anywhere near 10% off. They may not give us any off, and we may lose the deal to a buyer who's more realistic. In a case where the house is overpriced, 10% may not be enough. So my job is to provide the knowledge for you of what are motivating factors, what makes this a strong offer, and what value we think is right for the house. And as long as we have that knowledge, we are going to be able to write a winning contract for you, and it's a winning contract for the seller as well. In the next video, we're going to go through the contract to buy and sell briefly so that you know what it looks like as a standard template. But this is our starting point. Before we write the offer, we get the knowledge to find out how do we get to a win-win for both you and for the seller. Have a great day. Thanks a lot.